How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Euro, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the rear control arms on your G01 X3 M40i. Now, as you can see, we've already gone ahead and replaced the control arms on the driver's side, and we had them on the table for comparison. So we have the new genuine arms that we're going to be replacing in today's DIY. Now, our X3 has about 80,000 miles on it, generally 60 to 100,000, maybe even 120,000 miles, depending on your driving style and where exactly you're living in the country or in the world. You may want to consider replacement. The bushings do tend to have a little bit of wear. You can see some cracking in the corners of the bushings. The upper control arm here does have a ball joint included, and then there are two ball joints that we will not be servicing in the actual steering knuckle or the subframe as well. So generally, if you're in the vicinity of the area doing some suspension work, this is something you want to consider. If you're doing one arm, you may want to consider all of them, as the bushings do kind of wear as an assembly, as a full suspension. None of the arms typically tend to wear out more than the other, although, as I said, with the ball joints, you may have some clunking or some actual loose steering feel if you're doing a shakedown on the suspension on the back of the vehicle. Now, aside from all the control arms we've gone over that we'll be replacing in today's DIY, we do have a lot of additional hardware. All this hardware is one-time use, as it does have a final torque angle, and it is recommended to be replaced by the manufacturer. We also have a couple of plastic inserts here that will be installed in the bottom of the lower camber arm. We do have them still installed in the one that we have removed here. They do look a little bit difficult to be removed safely and then reinstalled without having them be loose or possibly breaking them. So we've included those in the kit. There's also a small clip on the thrust arm here, or the trailing link, that we'll go over, and we will also have that linked in the description below, although we do not have it on the table here at the moment. Ours was able to be reused, and hopefully yours will be too. One more thing I want to touch on is in regards to hardware. Is there an update to the toe adjustment? As you can see, this bolt does look fairly different. However, the actual length of the threads and the actual bolt is the same. The previous bolt that we have removed from the vehicle does have a small adjustment on the end that is very easily stripped and does not make for an easy time if you're in for an alignment and that does strip. As you can see, the adjustment here is much longer and will allow for a lot more torque to be applied and adjust that alignment. Now that we've gone over all the components on the table, let's go over some of the tools we'll need to take care of the job. Now, as far as tools are concerned, you may see me using a variation of what I have in front of me, but this is the majority of what we're going to need here today. Got a small wheel hanger out front and a pair of pliers. We've also got a E10, a 10 millimeter, and a 14 millimeter. Yes, I said 14 millimeter. We'll get into that later. A pair of 18 millimeter wrenches, as well as a pair of 21 millimeter wrenches. It's going to be very crucial to have one with a little bit of a longer throw. Also, a couple of 3/8 ratchets. You see I have one that's a little bit longer as well. A lot of these fasteners are very tight, so you will want to have some tools with some added leverage. I have a 1/2-inch universal joint, which we may or may not use, about 3-inch 1/2-inch extension, as well as a 6-inch 3/8 extension, 17 millimeter for pulling the wheels, and then all the control arm bolts are an 18 and a 21. So you will want a varying sizes and drives of the 18 millimeter and 21 millimeter. With that, I also have a 21 millimeter torque adapter. You may also benefit from having an 18 millimeter version of these. We're also going to need a little punch or driver to line up some of the holes for the control arms. A couple of different impact guns I'm going to have available here today. Small little bit driver, a 3/8 impact gun, and a 1/2-inch impact gun. We have a pry bar here, as well as a hammer, a 1/2-inch torque wrench, a 3/8 torque wrench. Most crucial of all is a tape measure of your choice, whether it's metric or standard, and we're definitely going to need a couple of flashlights. This may not be something you're going to be using in the garage, but if you have a 2-post lift, you'll want a pole jack, but you can certainly get away with some jack stands and or an additional floor jack. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the repair. Now, before we get started, the first step we want to make sure we take care of is getting a ride height measurement. You want to make sure your tire pressures are set and you have a full tank of fuel, and the specification is around 423 plus or minus 10 millimeters. Ours is going to be a little bit higher as we had this vehicle up in the air, but this is just for display purposes for you guys. We want to get close to about that 423 plus or minus 10 millimeters, and if I recall correctly, we're right around the 440 mark. So one thing you do want to keep in mind, if you have the parking brake set, which we may actually have set, when we brought the car down, it almost lifts the vehicle up as it's clamping the rotor and not allowing it to spin. So we may have to double check we have the parking brake off and get this back down to that 423. You also could jump on the back bumper and jounce the suspension a little bit just to make sure that everything's settled. But having a full tank of gas, making sure that the trunk's not overloaded, and making sure that the vehicle has everything in it that it would have going down the road is a good way to make sure that we have a good ride height. We are going to want to reference that ride height when we have the wheel off and support the hub in a way that we can get it close to that ride height before we tighten up all of our suspension components. With that, let's get the car up in the air and remove this wheel and get started. Go ahead and grab yourself a 17mm to get the wheels off. And if you have a wheel lock key, grab that as well. Ours was located in the trunk for us. Hopefully yours is not missing. I'm going to use a wheel hanger here, making our lives a little easier. All right, now we do have to take a couple of trim panels off, so we'll get the car up in the air so you guys can get a better look at that. All right, now that we're up under the car, we do want to take off this little airfoil on the lower camber arm here. You will have two 8mm screws that we'll have to remove. I like to use this little magnetic socket because these are a very shallow headed bolt, but after you get those screws out, we're going to just slide the control arm cover out of the way. You're going to push it out towards the rotor and then it should release and pivot down. Now we're able to put a pull jack underneath the bottom of this control arm without worrying about bending or cracking this plastic. So as you can see, we've already made some marks in here as we were doing the struts on the back of the car in another DIY. You can certainly reference that. However, you are going to want to make a couple of marks because we are going to loosen up a lot of these camber and toe adjustments. So mark these two eccentric bolts and we'll have a little discussion on that as we go putting those back in as to how to transfer those to the new pieces of hardware. However, I'm going to put this off to the side and then we'll go into a couple little intricacies on the other side of the car that I want to touch on that are not on this side of the vehicle. So you'll notice on the driver's side, on the rear lower trailing arm link, there is a level sensor here. I just wanted to talk about this because it's only on the driver's side and we're going to be showing you the passenger side. There is a 10mm screw here. And the reason we wanted to show you this is because you'll have to transfer this nutsert. We do not have this in on the table, but we will have this installed in the kit and we'll also have it linked below. The reason we want to talk about this is as these vehicles begin to age, this may start to corrode in there. The piece of hardware here may also get stuck in there. So when you're transferring to a new control arm here, you're going to probably want a new insert, possibly a new piece of hardware as well. There is some Loctite in there, so this may actually be very, very tight in there. I did transfer this over to a new link successfully. However, again, as these cars age and depending on the climate you have it in, that may not be so easy. So just wanted to touch on that. And one more thing, while you are working in this area in the upper link, as you'll see later on in this video when we're over here, you're more than likely going to want to remove this sensor entirely. It does have two T25 pieces of hardware there and the connector on the end, but just a little tidbit, when you're on this side, you're going to want to swing that out of your way just so you don't damage it, as they are fairly expensive. So I'm going to go ahead and put this bolt back in here and we'll continue on the other side. Now, before we go ahead and compress any of the suspension, we do want to crack loose a couple of these components back here on this lower camber arm. We are going to want to support this here, so it is going to be a little bit difficult where you're supporting that to get a socket or a wrench on these pieces of hardware. So the bolt heads back here on this arm are all 18mm and all the nuts are 21mm. And as I mentioned earlier, make sure you give yourself a good mark on the rear camber and toe adjustments so that we can transfer those to the other pieces of hardware later. So I'm going to break these free and then we'll grab a pull jack to support this up. And then this one back here does have this little fancy doorway, which I'm just going to kind of tip out of the way and put my 18mm wrench here. And you'll notice these are not very tight, as we just had these off when we were doing the rear struts. So be mindful of that. These are definitely going to be a lot tighter than you see here in this video. Now for this, you can certainly use a normal floor jack or something, but being on the 2-post lift, we're definitely going to need something a little bit taller than that. So what we want to do is support directly below the shock, and the lower camber arm is not exactly flat. So it may want to slip inward, so you kind of have to keep a hand on there as you're tensioning that. We're going to go ahead and release the outer bolt meeting into the knuckle and then get that out of the way, and then we'll go ahead and get this lower shock bolt out. So I can see already that the knuckle is actually pulling up on this, so we want to push this up just slightly to the point where you can see a little bit of space between the bolt, and you may even be able to pull it out by hand. So again, you just want to get the suspension compressed enough so you get to a point where that bolt comes out relaxed. You don't want this to drag, as it is going to be destroying a bushing that's in the knuckle, pressed into the knuckle, and basically marring some of that aluminum in the center of that. So be mindful of that as you're removing that and releasing that. Now I can lower this just a little bit to get that shock untensioned, and the knuckle may jump out of this a little bit, as you saw there. You'll notice I did leave the pull jack under here. There's a potential that after you loosen this, since we've loosened this inner arm, that this may just drop down. However, with that new Bilstein shock in there that we've already installed, it is a little bit of a tight fit. So go ahead and get that out of the way. And I did want to mention, it would definitely be a little bit easier removing this shock. We do not have the hardware for the shock and strut assembly in this kit. However, with a couple of the control arms being in a little bit of a tight area, it wouldn't be a bad idea to take this shock assembly out and be able to work in this area. However, for this DIY, we will be working with this in our way. But as always, if you do want to see how to remove that shock properly, and even a little bit of disassembly for replacing that shock and reusing the spring, we do have a complete DIY on that as well. So be sure to check that out and subscribe for other DIYs. And this is still a little bit too tight to be removed by hand. Just like that. One control arm removed. So before we move on with the rest of the control arms, now that we've got this one out of the way, you'll notice that we do have a brake level sensor as well as an ABS sensor. So we want to get these out of our way. One is attached to one of the control arms, but we don't want to pinch any of these. You'll notice there's a little box here where those connectors lead into. So we're just going to pop that open. You may need a little pocket screwdriver, and there is probably going to be some dirt and debris in there. So popping these out of their spot, doesn't matter. If you mix them up, they will probably fall right back into where they go. All right, get those undone. There is two more spots where it connects here. Just kind of slide those out. There we go. So the brake level sensor we can kind of bring out this way, and I'll just kind of tie it up around here. Just want to keep it out of our way. This one is in this little plastic clip, so you want to be careful not to damage that clip. But if you are careful, you can kind of open it up a little bit with your fingers and push that out nice and easy. Just want to get that one out of our way as well. This particular clip here could potentially break when you're swapping it over to the new control arm, but we will have these linked in the description below should you need one of those. You can certainly use a pair of needle nose pliers getting behind it and squeezing the two outside tabs to release that from that control arm. However, we will need to reuse that, and we'll try to remove that nice and carefully now. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to see this, but I'll show you once we get it out. I'm going to use a pair of needle nose to squeeze the two clips on the outside of this from inside of the control arm. And then with another hand, use that to kind of work the clip out. You may have to depress one at a time until you get it released. So you'll see I was kind of just squeezing the outside here just to get that worked through. But you can see there's a lot of wear on that. It's really just holding the ABS harness out of the way, so we should be fine to reuse that. But we will have these linked in the description below. As these cars are going to age, these may begin to get very brittle and not want to be removed easily. So this rear toe link, as we said earlier, you are going to want to make a mark on that one. And it does have a slightly recessed bolt on the front side of the subframe. There is a slight provision on the end of the bolt here. You can use that to counter hold that with an 11 millimeter. Using a 21, we're just going to crack this one loose. And that should be okay. We don't have to counter hold the other side, but now that this is starting to spin, we can use that 11 millimeter to hold that in place and not have to fumble with the recessed bolt in the subframe. Get that out of your way. Now we're going to go back out to the outside of the knuckle and crack that one free. We are going to want to support this slightly, but we can just get this loosened up. And again, this is a 21, just like the inside fastener there. And now, before we keep going on this and start to remove the rest of the control arms, it may be wise to go ahead and loosen up a couple of these connections. As you saw me trying to loosen this one, the knuckle is going to begin to move and you're going to have a little bit more flexibility. So I will suggest to go through and loosen up all your other connections. You've got a couple 18s on this front link, some more 21s here, and then on the top you have a couple of 21s as well. So we're going to go through and just crack those free real quick, and then we'll go back to the actual removal and installation of the arms themselves. So starting on the lower trailing link here, it is double 18s. It is a little bit smaller fastener than the rest of the car. That's good as well. And then there is a couple more up here. We're gonna focus on the outer link here, which is a 21. And it is a little bit close to the sway bar, so be mindful of that. All right, and as you saw, that was a very, very tight fastener, and it does go into the steering knuckle, so you wanna be careful with that one. This was the one fastener that I was gonna suggest to remove the strut for. So if you're having difficulty getting leverage there and you wanna get an impact gun on there, best course of action would be to remove the strut and have a direct path to remove that piece of hardware. So we'll move on to the one on the subframe here, which is a 21 millimeter as well, but I may have to get the car down a little bit more to get in the back side of that. All right, that one's pretty good. We've got one more back here on the top upper wishbone looking link, the aluminum one. It's actually an 18 on the head. And this is probably another one where it would be certainly beneficial to have a little bit more room with that strut out of your way. All right, we have one more fastener I just need to loosen up. All right, so outward portion of the last control arm we are able to get to with an impact gun. It is a 21 millimeter. Just gonna counter hold the front of it on my tippy toes here. All right, that's pretty much it. Everything's loosened up. Now we're ready to start taking everything out one by one. Now, one thing we do want to keep in mind as we're starting to disassemble these, if you have all 5 of these out, the only thing that's going to be supporting this is going to be your sway bar link and your axle. You don't want to put any added stress on that axle, so we want to keep in mind at least keeping one of these links, whether it's old or new, in during this entire repair. So we're going to start taking off this rear toe link to start. Got a washer on the inboard section of there. We'll get that out of our way. Maybe able to push this through. Get a screwdriver and a punch, but once we loosen that up, that'll fall right out. So we've already loosened this one up. Go ahead and take it out, and there we have it. As we mentioned earlier, this bolt is going to be replaced by the longer bolt with the extended lug on the end of that, but we're going to be replacing that later on, and we'll talk about that again. Now we're going to move on to the front trailing link and getting that one out of our way, and that's just going to be a pair of 18 millimeters, just like before. At this point, we can get that out of there, and then with ease, go ahead and remove that bolt. Now, when going after the last 2 control arms, it may be helpful to have your pole jack or floor jack handy, and just keep the jack underneath the end of the knuckle for a little added support. It'll also help raising and lowering, trying to get the bolts out, and acting as a third hand, if you will. Our brake wire back out of the way here. All right. Again, it doesn't need to go too far up, but just a little bit of support will help you with easily removing that bolt. So we've already cracked this one loose. I'm going to put the impact gun on there with an extension. So definitely do not do as I did, do as I say. Getting the inner portion of that little wishbone control arm, the front upper, if you will, is going to give you a little bit less tension on that outer joint, and that outer joint goes into the steering knuckle. We don't want any problems with that, so definitely start on the inside, taking all the tension off of the outer portion of that knuckle, and then that outer bolt should come out a lot easier. Hopefully yours is not giving you this much resistance, but I have a feeling this is taking out the threads in the knuckle. Somebody may have been in here and improperly installed this, but I've got the bolt about halfway out, and now it's giving me a hard time. I shouldn't have to use this much leverage and this much force with the bolt this far out. All right, well, there's part of the knuckle, and that bolt's been heavily destroyed. So when you take your bolt out, your threads should look like this, and it should not have any resistance once you crack it free. They should certainly not look like that. So fortunately for us, we were able to repair these threads. However, I will let you know that if these threads do get damaged, it is definitely a better situation to go ahead and replace the knuckle rather. It is a quite expensive component, so we want to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing when you're taking this apart, as well as putting it back together. You want to be very cognizant not to put too much pressure on that bolt when you're putting it in. So when we go to reinstall this one, I will show you the best way to do this is installing the spherical ball joint-ish end to the knuckle first before fitting the other end into the subframe. Another thing to keep in mind, the end of this wishbone does have a spherical end that goes directly into that. You do not want to mount that the wrong way with the flat surface touching the knuckle. It will definitely come loose, it'll make a lot of noise, and it'll do a lot of damage to the knuckle. So make sure you have your right arm, which is stamped with an R, on the right side of the vehicle. Same thing with the left. And we'll go over the same thing again on the toe arm here as well. One other thing, the bolts do have this little triangular washer. You'll have two different size bolts. The one that we're working with now is an M16 by 1.5, which I was able to use a tap and actually repair those threads to my best ability. Ideally, if this was my car, I'd probably go ahead and replace it, but we're gonna see if this fastener torques down and if we can secure this back together. So again, be very careful when you're removing this as well as installing. Before we go ahead and remove that upper wishbone, as I discussed, we are gonna put this new one back in. So I'm gonna just kind of put the rear section over the subframe and line this up the best we can, making sure that we have plenty of tension released from that arm and it's only being installed by hand. You may have to release the arm a little bit and kind of wiggle it around to make sure that you get this started a couple of threads. You don't want to get this in just a few threads and then use your impact gun because you're getting impatient. You want to really be careful to start this by hand, making sure that there's not any cross threading going on. It's not a through bolt, so you are going to run into some issues if that begins to cross thread. As you saw when we took that out, that may have been cross threaded by someone else previously. All right, it's starting to get a little bit tough. I'm going to use my ratchet to continue to finish that in. And with a 21 on my ratchet, I'm just going to lightly bring that in. It's not giving me much of a fight, so I'm pretty confident we'll be able to torque this back up to spec. We're almost all the way in. We're just gonna get this to pretty much butt up against that bushing, and then we're gonna fit the subframe end of this wishbone back in with the bolt. But we wanna make sure that we don't put any added stress on this and get most of that bolt into the knuckle so that it doesn't pull on that in any abnormal fashion. So I'm gonna run this all the way down and then just back it up a little bit. All right, we got the new bolt in there too. We're gonna get this seated into the subframe little eyelet here. Now, just like the bolt that we pulled out of there, it's gonna be the shorter 21 millimeter head with a little bit of a collar here, and it's gonna be being installed from the rear of the vehicle forward. If you recall from our G20 video, this specific control arm used to be installed with the bolt facing the other way, and in order to actually get it out, it would need to be removed, or we actually cut the bolt when we removed that bolt. So luckily with this design, we're able to put the bolt in the easier way. And I may still have to adjust this a little bit. Just want to center that the best you can so you can put this bolt in with ease. Spin it in a little bit just to kind of guide it. Double check the back side to see if we need to line it up a little bit better. Manipulate the knuckle a little bit if you have to. I'm just going to use the ratchet to run that in the rest of the way. Put the bolt on the back here. We're not going to get this all the way tight. We're just going to get this fitted so it keeps the knuckle kind of in place while we go replace that upper one. All right, it's still pretty loose, but it's almost all the way threaded in. Again, we're just going to leave that there. We're going to tighten that back up when we get the suspension compressed at ride height and tighten everything all at the same time. All right, now with a 21 millimeter on the nut and an 18 on the head of the bolt, just going to get this inside one loose. So got the nut out. However, the piece of hardware is definitely going to fight us. It's definitely going to be helpful to have a wheel hanger out here. We're going to work the knuckle in and out until the piece of hardware gets to the point where it wants to come out nice and easily. I'm going to grab a pry bar, get under the head of the bolt, and just kind of work it out. Now we can just pop it up and out of the subframe. All right, now that we've got this nice and loose, there's gonna be a lot less tension on the outer section of this. And we've already gone ahead and loosened up this bolt, took the nut off. So there's a small bracket on the top of this knuckle here, which if it's in your way, you may wanna get this out. It's a small little bracket that's just there to hold the ABS harness from getting rubbed or pinched or anything like that. So do not forget to put this back in. And as I said earlier, when I did the off-camera side on the driver's side of the car, I was able to do the upper control arm without taking this bracket out. But it was dragging a little bit when we're getting it out of here. So look at that. Now it came out with these. These bushings weren't too worn, but the nice thing about doing these arms, this one has a ball joint in here. And then as we spoke before, the knuckle does have two more press-in ball joints. So That takes care of all 5 arms being replaced. We've already got 1 back in there. We've only got 4 more to go back in before we can start tightening everything up. So I'm gonna go grab the new upper wishbone and some new hardware, and I'll catch you guys in a sec. Before we install this, that ball joint on the end on a new control arm is gonna be very stiff. So take a end of a ratchet, take a screwdriver handle, an extension, and just articulate that ball joint just a little bit to give you a little bit more flexibility when you're going to install that. So that's gonna help us a lot. If you grab this from brand new, you can't even move it by hand, but now I can move it around nice and easily. So that'll definitely make installation a little bit easier. Now again, you will have a stamping for the right side or the left side. Make sure you have the correct arm in the correct position. You will not be able to put the left one in with the ball joint out, as the wishbone here will hit the strut. So just go ahead and tip this in just like we took it out. I may have to move that ball joint slightly. I want to get it started in the knuckle first. Easier said than done, as always. And if you saw that, I did have to move the ball joint slightly just to get that to drop into place. And we're just going to slide the new bolt in there from the front of the vehicle towards the back. Get this at least started. Drop the nut on there. Now we want to get this situated into place. All right, so we're definitely going to want to support the knuckle slightly just to get a little bit of the hanging tension off of this to get that control arm to go in. All right, same thing we had before. Just want to center the bolt slightly so that it goes in nice and easy. Now, if the bolt's giving you a little bit of a hard time, use the threads to your benefit. And it'll start to walk itself in. So just tighten the bolt up. As long as you got a little bit sticking out. Put a nut on the end of that. All right, that should be all right for now. Just want to go ahead and get the rest of these fitted up. We got nuts and bolts on those. Just give them a little snug to make sure that they don't fall off while you're working. And I'm really hoping that that thing tightens back up, but we'll figure that one out later. So we're gonna put the car back up in the air and get those last 3 lower control arms installed. Now we're ready to go ahead and put our trailing arm in. So we're gonna fit it into the subframe first and then pull the knuckle in closer. And one thing to keep in mind, these are gonna be the smallest pieces of hardware in this little assembly, as these are the 18 head bolt with an 18 headed nut. So get this fitted in the subframe, slide one of those in there, and then we're gonna be close, but we will have to persuade this one into place slightly. There we go. Now we can go ahead and fit the 2 small 18mm nuts on the back of that one. Keep our strut from getting scratched on this control arm here, or this sway bar link bolt. All right, we have one more of these spherical type control arms here. This one did not give us a hard time, if you guys recall, coming out, so I'm not too concerned about this one. However, we do want to start on the outer section of that, on the knuckle portion. And just like that other wishbone that did give us a hard time, this also has that spherical bushing and a flat side on one. So make sure that the spherical end goes into the steering knuckle and the flat side is going to be facing out towards the bolt with the triangular washer. So we're going to just lightly fit this just like this, running the bolt in by hand. All right, now that we get that one fitted, I'm going to slide this up here. May have to push knuckle out a little bit. This one does have a little bit of an oval opening to account for the eccentric bolt that will be going in there, so it does give us a little bit of wiggle room left to right. We're going to go ahead and fit that updated bolt that I was discussing earlier from the backside, which is definitely going to be a little bit difficult because it is recessed in the subframe, so you're not going to be able to see that blind hole. We're only going to be really able to work it from out here, moving the knuckle in and out, trying to get that bolt to be fitted. So on this particular link, this is where you're going to put that extended bolt we discussed in the beginning here. So we're going to try to fish it through here and see if we're even close to lined up. There is a little bit of a window in the subframe you can kind of see. It's not going to be the best point of reference, but let's see how far off we are. Let me get my pry bar. I might have to manipulate it a little. We're going to get our eccentric nut. It does have this weird little shape on it. The frog looking face, or smiley face if you will. The 2 dimples are going to be in the notches on the bolt, and the half circle is going to kind of sit on the outside of the thread. And if you notice, it doesn't sit perfectly in those notches. Do not tighten the bolt up like this. You want this to transfer to those marks that you made. And I did make a mark on the roughly in the center of this washer. So I'm going to want this washer to be about at the 5 o'clock position before I tighten this back up. And this is going to be a slightly odd size. It's going to be a 14 millimeter on the head of that bolt. If you work on Japanese cars, it's a very common size, but in the German world, a 14 is very, very seldomly used. All right, as you can see there, that is almost back in that recess. You want to make sure that the opposing bolt is not doing anything different. You want it to kind of be in the same fashion with that washer. But it is notched so that you cannot oppose these two. We're going to get this one close. We don't want this to skip out of those indents on us. And we're just going to back it up. Fine tune our adjustment. As I said, I wanted the high point of that washer to kind of be, oh no, I wanted it the other way. I apologize. I wanted it up top. That's why we make the marks. Right about there. All right, so we've got one more arm to go, and we haven't tightened anything else up, so we're going to slide that one in and try to get the car to ride height, but I have a feeling we're not going to get to that point. We may have to bring it onto the ground. So, as I said before, the new pieces of hardware will have little tick marks in them, which will make it a lot easier to kind of line up your central mark. You're able to see that well. So I'm going to try to get it pretty much, again, 180 off. That's why we make the marks. Right about there is where we're going to try to finish this up. And again, the vehicle will need to get aligned. This is just going to make sure that the car doesn't dart around on you until you get the vehicle aligned. All right, fit that in there. That recessed in there. And then we have the same washer on the lower section here. All right, similar to how we removed this, we're going to get it into the lower shock eye first. You may need to pry back on the strut slightly to get that to line up. Now, to get the knuckle to line up a little bit easier, we are going to have to kind of work that in. Looks like it's going to kind of fall into place. That's the nice thing about having all the rest of the control arms relaxed. At this point, we can pretty much just put that bolt right back in. Here we go. All right, all of our control arms are fitted. All of our hardware is roughly in place. Now we need to get the vehicle's control arm and suspension geometry kind of resting where the vehicle will be sitting when it's going down the road, which is what we're meaning when we reference the ride height. So we're going to try to support this and monitor the vehicle coming up off the lift potentially, but hopefully we can get the ride height of about 440 millimeters, which is what we measured in the beginning, while we're here on the lift. But we don't want to put the airfoil back on here because we do still have to support this a little bit. And I'm not the tallest here, so I am going to have to bring this car down just a little bit. So whether you're on the two-post lift or on the garage in your driveway, we do still want to get the vehicle to ride height. You can use a jack stand, you can use a floor jack. We were using this pole jack here, and I've got a reference of about 439, 440, which is right about where we were when we were on the ground with all four wheels down. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten up all the control arms in the rear here before moving on to the forward ones. I do want to make mention there's no ideal way to tighten them all down in a certain fashion if you have all of them loose. Just want to make sure that they're all being tightened at that ride height. Let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to start on this lower camber arm here. We did make a couple of marks so that we can pull that adjustment in. And we had it right about there. Again, this is just a rough estimate. This is not going to be a perfect alignment. You may have had bent control arms before, so you could certainly set all of your adjustments up in a zero position, which would be just the eccentric portion of the washer all straight up and down. But we're going to bring these back to where they were before bringing them over to the alignment rack and have that done. So this inner bolt here on the lower camber arm is an 18 millimeter head with a 21 millimeter nut, and we're going to be torquing this to 175 Newton meters. Once you get it close, give the adjustment another look, make a final adjustment to get it where you want it. There we go. And then there's a little door there. We can close that one off, and we'll make a mark on that to remind us that we've already taken care of that, as we are going to be going through this entire control arm setup. So you don't want to go through and double torque things, because a lot of these do have a final 90 degree on them. Next up, we're going to do the lower shock bolt, which is also a 18 millimeter and a 21 millimeter nut. We did replace this when we replaced our shocks, so keep in mind that this is not part of the kit, and you may want to have this additionally, which we'll have in the description below. So this is a 100 Newton meters plus a 90 degree. All right, now the outer bolt here, also an 18 millimeter and a 21 millimeter nut. This is going to be 165 Newton meters plus 90. All right, that takes care of the lower camber arm so far. Now, while we still have the torque wrench set up to the 165 plus 90 that we just did here, we'll go ahead and move on to the fastener at the outside of this toe link that attaches to the steering knuckle. You do want to make sure that you have all of these very close, but not very tight. So the washer was still able to be moved a little bit here. You can see it's not under full tension, but it is close. So that's a 21 millimeter, and it is, just like I said, 165 plus 90. Now, when doing the 90 degree final turn, it's most likely ideal to be coming down against the pressure of the jack. If you go up, you may be actually starting to lift the vehicle up of the jack stand or the floor jack that you have it on, as we're already at the limit of the pretty much spring tension of this car. And it's not loose, but it is not exactly under the same weight. So we do want to put that final torque going down. There we go. Now we're going to move right along to the inner, and that is also a 21 millimeter. We are going to counter hold this with a 14 millimeter, as this was the updated bolt that we installed, and this has a little bit of a longer extended head, which is going to make for tightening and adjusting that in the long run a lot easier. So I've just got a 14 millimeter on a breaker bar, and you may want a deep or semi-deep socket, as there is a nice long shank on there, so we make sure that we don't strip that while we're tightening that up quite a lot. The torque spec on this is 165 Newton meters, no final 90, as these are your adjustment bolts. Keep an eye on the marks you may have made and keep that alignment as close to it was before. All right, takes care of those two arms. The inner bolt that joins it to the subframe is a 21 millimeter nut with an 18 millimeter head, and that is also going to be 165 plus 90. Definitely going to find it easier to go in front of the toe arm but behind the camber arm, and I am using a flexible joint torque wrench here. You may need a different series of extensions, but this is what I'm going to be using here at this moment to get what we need to do. So use whatever you have at your disposal to make this work. There we go. Now we got to get 90. All right, next up we're going to do the outer end of that one, which is the very long bolt. We may need to get a little bit longer socket just to clear the dust shield here, and I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna counter hold that, but we'll catch you guys in a second while I fumble around with some tools here. So 165 plus 90, I'm gonna use a 21 millimeter deep socket with an extension to clear this dust shield, and I've got a 21 millimeter wrench counter holding, just kind of wedged up in the control arms. Ideally, this is probably easier accessed from above, but showing you guys that from above would be tough. 165, now we got to do the final 90. This lower arm does have two 18s on it. The upper does have 21 millimeters, so we'll have to do a little tool switch and get ready to do that front track arm. The smaller 18s on this track arm are going to be 100 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. All right, and then unfortunately we are going to have to reposition our jack just to get a socket onto that bolt there. I can't get any clearance from the dust shield side, so I'm going to move this pole jack in a little bit. You may want to keep it in a different spot, but it was nice to have it out here so we can get to that lower shock bolt. But once you get all this tightened up, you can move that jack wherever you need to. I wouldn't put it underneath the front of here because you're probably still going to get in the way of that piece of hardware. So we'll just move it a little bit more inboard towards the inside of the car. When doing this though, we do want to keep in mind that we do still want to get back to that ride height measurement. Wherever yours was, you want to get close to that. All right, we had to switch to a little bit smaller torque wrench here to make some clearance of that dust shield and our rear control arm, but we were going to do that same 100 plus 90. And that was a little over torqued for that limit of that torque wrench, so I'm just going to finish that 90 degree. It's not obviously going to be 100% accurate, but we just want to get a little bit more on that one. It's probably like 85 degrees. For you guys at home, definitely don't use a torque wrench that's going to max out over 150, 160 Newton meters. If you're doing the degrees on there, you can always just make a mark on the bolt and move it 90 degrees. So let's go ahead and get that one last control arm tightened up after we mark these two bolts. And again, we're going to be pulling down against the pole jack, pushing up, because this is going to be that 165 plus 90. It is quite a lot of torque. So let's hope that this thread holds up. All right, there's 165. Now we got to do about a 90 degree turn. I think it's going to be best if I do that with just a ratchet and make a mark. We'll try to get that final 90. All right. There's the 90 degrees. We got one more bolt on that same arm, which is also a 21, if I recall, and a 21 on the backside. And that is going to be that same 165 plus 90, which will be a lot more accessible from down here as well. All right. You get that 90 degree, and then we're almost done. All right. All right, now let's take the tension off of the suspension here. And we still gotta connect up these wire harnesses, put on that lower airfoil. We're almost there. Now for the brake sensor harness, we wanna just run this from the sensor. You could even tuck it under the bleeder cap here. We're just going to leave this one up over this control arm and bring the ABS sensor from the rear up and over through. It's like tying your shoes, right? Through this little opening between the sway bar and the control arm, and then we had this clip that we removed from this control arm earlier. I'm going to pop that in place into the new arm. That's going to go in there like that. Get this one up here. Going to go in the rear position, and then we'll bring that brake line one up as well. Actually, I'm going to go around the outside of that. All right, I guess I'm going to have to take it out of here. Looks like somebody's put the wrong brake sensors in this before we got the car. So hopefully we'll address that when we do our rear brakes. And if you're interested in rear brakes, check that out on another DIY where hopefully we install the correct sensor. There it goes. So with a little force and patience, it will fall back into place, and then this little box up here. Oh, and then we just want to tuck them back into the box, keep them out of the way. Now, next up, we want to put on our little airfoil cover. If you have both of them off, keep in mind they are directional. This one being the passenger side, it will have an R on it. Does have this little clip in here, and this will expand over the outside of here. However, we did have to install some new nut certs. These little plastic inserts are difficult to transfer from the old control arms, so we'll have some new ones in the kit here for you. Simply just press them into the square hole into the lower camber arm, and then again with the curved portion going forward, hook the outside of the camber arm, slide that into place, and then your hole should line up nicely. With the 8mm screws we removed, factory torque spec is only about 3 Newton meters, so don't need to go crazy on those. That should hold that in place with the clip and the provision there. Now we got to get our vehicle back down on the ground and get that wheel torqued up. We'll be right back with you guys in a second. Now, before we go ahead and throw the wheel on, I did get a little ahead of myself as we were working underneath, and I forgot about this small little bracket for the ABS sensor that we did have to remove to get the upper control arm, very longer bolt out of there. And we're just going to use the external Torx that we removed to take it out. It's about an 8 Newton meter torque spec. And when you do install it, you want to make sure that you get this little nub into the provision inside of the steering knuckle. I'm going to just snug this up and throw our wheel on, and we're almost done. All right, and that pretty much takes care of today's DIY. We'll get the car down on the ground, torque the wheel up to 140 Newton meters, but there's no need to bore you guys with that. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If so, hit that like button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, get down in the comment section down below. And as always, we'll have plenty more videos on this vehicle and many others like it, so don't forget to subscribe. We'll catch you on the next one, guys.